Oh, and then I had a note on here, sorry, this is a repeat, but it was for myself, that there's some provisions of the Families First Coronavirus Act that encourage us to maybe get doctor's notes. So put a footnote in that. We're going to talk about leave in a second. All right, what are those symptom-based guidelines that the CDC has come out with now? They've changed. I'm going to tell you what's changed, but what's on the slide are the new ones. They call it a milestone test. So the first one, if the employee's symptoms included a fever, if the employee stops taking aspirin or ibuprofen or anything else to reduce their fever, and it's been 24 hours since they had a fever, they've cleared that first milestone. It used to be 72 hours. So the CDC has actually reduced this. This might mean people are coming back to work sooner. That's kind of exciting. And then they want you to see that the symptoms are improving. It used to just be respiratory symptoms, but as we've all maybe learned by now, the CDC particularly, there's lots of other symptoms for COVID-19. So we're talking about all symptoms improving. And then the biggest change here is the CDC has decided, as a matter of course, most folks aren't contagious anymore after 10 days. And so the third milestone is if it's been 10 days since symptoms first began, the employee is going to be cleared to come back to work. So you could follow these three things and not require the doctor's note, according to CDC guidelines. There is an exception if somebody becomes severely ill with COVID-19. They're suggesting 20 days. I gotta tell you, you probably are never gonna have to figure out this 20-day thing. If somebody's that ill with COVID, they're seeking medical care, and what you're gonna get is a doctor's clearance for that person to return to work. What leave exists? So this is an employee who's been diagnosed with COVID, or somebody who we feel confident has been exposed to COVID, and we are sending them home to await diagnosis. Here's the leaves we talk about in our great state. We have the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which should be FFCRA. I've got my R and C transposed, sorry about that. We have Washington or Seattle, if you happen to be in Seattle's paid sick leave rights. And then don't forget about regular FMLA or regular Washington paid family medical leave. I have those here because they're going to apply if somebody becomes really ill. So we're talking about somebody who actually has COVID and is going to be out for more than 3 or more days. I'm not going to go over those in detail. I'm going to talk more about how these first two have changed. Remember that the Families First Coronavirus Response Act says employees have this 2 weeks of paid leave available to them, or it's basically 2 weeks worth of their hours. We'll talk about that in a second. If they're subject to a federal, state, or local quarantine or isolation order. Also, number 2 on here is advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine. So what does this mean if we are directing an employee to stay home based on a conclusion we've made? Well, it's not clear if the Families First Coronavirus Act actually applies here. And here's why I say that based on the next couple of slides. So remember I said a few slides ago that while the CDC is strongly discouraging that somebody gets a test or goes and sees their healthcare provider, in order for somebody to qualify for this FFCRA leave, we need them to have a healthcare provider recommending the quarantine. So this is where with a lot of my clients I end up with, we follow the CDC guidelines, but we still encourage our employees to go get a test or see their doctor. First off, we want to be doing that because we're not medical providers to our employees. And second off, we're trying to help our employees qualify for this leave. Because remember, you can always give this leave if you want to, but you might not get the tax credit. So here's the gotcha in this law. The FAQs, if you haven't had time to read them, are really, really helpful, but they're about up to FAQ 94 for FCRA now. But I pulled out just a couple. This one says, when am I eligible for paid sick leave to self-quarantine? And you'll see that the answer is you are eligible if a healthcare provider directs or advises you to stay home. So it's not because my employer told me to stay home because they're worried about me exposing others. It's because the healthcare provider has directed it. So there is a reason to send your employees still to see their doctor. The next one here we're talking about where emergency paid sick leave under the federal law could be available. And remember, this law applies only if you have under 500 employees or more than 50. It even says, I'm an employee, I become ill with symptoms, and I decide to stay home for 2 weeks. Well, good for this employee. I think this is a great thing that they don't want to take the risk of exposing folks. But they don't seek medical diagnosis or healthcare provider advice. Do they get the paid sick leave? And the federal government is telling us no, they wouldn't qualify under the Family First Leave in this instance. So again, to qualify for this federal leave, it really encourages that employee seeking advice of a healthcare provider. Now, practically speaking, do I think this is going to be a big deal? My clients who have had to deal with this that I've talked to about have said that their employees have been able to have an appointment through telehealth or some sort of phone conversation with their office and with the doctor's office and gotten confirmation that they should quarantine. So it's been fairly easy in our state, at least. I'm curious if other folks have had a problem. I think it's changed maybe a couple months ago to at least get something here so that FCRA leave is optional, available. This is, you can look at when you get the slides back. I thought I'd just remind everybody how much leave is available.